All right, we're going to start this morning's meeting. We've got 3 items on the agenda, and the first item is the carbon monoxide alarm bill. Want to take us through it?
Sure. What you have before you is Bill 2318, which essentially requires a carbon monoxide detector to be installed in existing homes. State law has already required carbon monoxide detectors in new construction for quite some time, and this would essentially cover the existing homes. There are 2 amendments for your consideration, both of which we recommend that you enact or recommend enacting. One is on Circle 7 of your packet. It essentially does 2 things. It clarifies what I've just said, that the bill applies to existing homes. Secondly, it moves the section from the fire code to Chapter 26, which is the section or the chapter related to housing and building maintenance standards. The other amendment that I placed before you basically updates the language to be more congruent with state law. I do know executive staff is here if you have any implementing questions.
No, I'm okay. Any discussion?
I'm in favor of it, and with the amendments. Thank you.
Okay, so it's 2-0. The next issue on the agenda is the update on public safety for us on the pedestrian safety.
I'm sure I turned mine on.
Okay.
Good morning, Susan Farrar, Council staff. As you indicated, the item before you today is an update for pedestrian safety. We have several executive staff representatives here, led by Captain Tom Didone, who's the director of the traffic division for the police department. We also have members of County Stat, the Public Information Office, and the Department of Transportation here today as well. In 2018, we have had 11 pedestrian deaths in the county, and 7 of those occurred this summer. The executive staff is going to provide an overview of statistics and data, potential causes of this, and their Vision Zero approach to engineering, education, and enforcement in order to try to reduce these by approximately 35% by November 2019. If Captain Didone wanted to walk the members through the issues.
Morning. I'm not sure, is this one, when it's red, it's good? It is, yeah. Okay, thanks. Couldn't tell which one. Good morning. Thanks for having us here. Normally this time of the year we do a full briefing, but I think in light of the summer that we had, I was asked to come forward and bring. So the team's still here. It's the same basic information, same issues. But we wanted to talk about this year is a little bit of scary. We have a little crisis going on, and so far after the summer we've made it. We've had 11 people lose their lives crossing the street, 19 people total in the county. As we know, we average about 28 deaths on our highways each year. Last year we had 11 people die crossing the street. So the fact that we reached that same level in August really concerned us all. One of the big questions that came up as we looked at the statistics, in your package we have the documents that we have broken out by fatals. We have fatals and serious injuries and pedestrian crashes overall. We know for a fact that, anytime we have a high volume of pedestrians and high vehicular traffic, primarily on our major arterials, we have the potential for these pedestrian crashes. We average over 400 a year, which is more than 1 a day. Any of them can be tragedy. We know that any time a car and a pedestrian try to occupy the same space, the pedestrian loses every time. It's the largest losing streak known to mankind. But this summer we had an anomaly. We had 9 people that lost their life. We did not have a pedestrian-related fatality until May 5th of this year, which is a little bit later than normal, but we caught up pretty quick. As you know, when the time changes is normally when we have our most pedestrian collisions, so we were really concerned the fact that we had these deaths on the roadways. When you looked at the 7, we call them the 7 because there were some that were very untraditional. There were certain common characteristics. We identified that the pedestrians essentially were crossing either not in a crosswalk or against the traffic signal in the crosswalk. Most of them occurred at night, and they were generally wearing dark clothing. So these were, all the factors that we've been working on our pedestrian safety to change over a period of time, but they came to a head. I think what drew the greatest attention was the fact that occurred in our Wheaton CBD. If these would have been spread out throughout the county as they traditionally have been in the past, it may not have gained attention. But when we saw the fact they were in one geographic area, it was able to draw the fact that we needed to do something, and it gave us an opportunity. So with that, we contacted Mr. Holland from Vision Zero and Mrs. Driscoll from the PIO's office, and we realized that we needed to engage in an education campaign. And as you looked at, and we briefed you over the years, I think from a personal perspective, our education campaign has been the most challenging for us. We've done a lot of tremendous engineering, and we've done a lot of enforcement, but it's really been difficult to find that golden program that help us get the message across. So we enacted a beginning of an education campaign, and I'll turn it over to Wade and Lorraine to talk about what we initiated downtown.
Thanks, Captain. My name is Wade Holland. I'm with the county stat team. I'd say Tom was the first one to call me when all these fatalities happened. He really said that we needed to do something to address that because, like I said, we were very concerned about the 11 we've already had this year. And we also wanted to use this as a pilot to kind of figure out what kind of sustainable education programs could we build in Wheaton that we could potentially use in other areas with high pedestrian collision rates. So we worked with Luisa Montero in the Mid-County Regional Service Center. We had a large meeting. We looked at the crash statistics in Wheaton and the Glenmont area. And basically within a day or two, we built out the new palm cards, which are on the last page, Circle 24. We've handed out over 2,000 in a week. We've used a combination of street teams that DOT pays for, as well as SHA. And we also use the Wheaton Urban District teams to hand out these palm cards to kind of instruct pedestrians about safe crossing in the area.
And Lorraine Driscoll, Public Information Office. And I just wanted to add one of the things that we have been working on with our communications efforts is to really boil the message down on some of the most high priority issues. And pedestrians getting hit in the roadway is one of the leading causes of our fatalities, as well as severes. And so we're really focusing, so this message was designed to be very pithy, to hit the reasons that the police reports are demonstrating are what's behind people getting hit, and to do it in English and Spanish on the same side of the page and make it very pithy, but also to get people's attention. Don't gamble with your life, but then, okay, here's the 3 or 4 steps to take to be safe. So we are hoping that by focusing our message on the highest causes of crashes, that the education campaign can start to help push this initiative.
And as you look throughout the year, in your packet, you'll see that we have education campaigns that work for both drivers as well as the pedestrians. When we looked at the statistics, when we have a pedestrian-related crash and the pedestrian is not killed, it's about 60% the drivers at fault, 40% the pedestrians at fault. But when we have the fatal crash, it's about 80%. In this case, it's probably a little more this year.
80% which?
The pedestrians at fault. So that's why in this immediate focus based on the data that we had with the serious crashes. We immediately went with the pedestrian-related education campaign, but I didn't want you to think at all we were abandoning the drivers, because we know that that is an issue, and as we said, throughout the year we have education campaigns as well. We also we target our enforcement, and when you look at the packet, we've talked about it for years, but it's our high incident area. The high incident area, and everything that we do, whether it's enforcement, engineering, it is data driven. We're no longer just going with what we think. We look at what the data tells us. And as a result, we've identified areas of potential high incident areas. And that's where we look to do our enforcement. We invested lots of money in our engineering, but if we don't educate and we don't enforce, then they won't all use it. We also, with the additional $80,000 you provided for us 3 fiscal years ago to enhance our enforcement opportunities, we have expanded our realm and got the district stations involved. And they've identified district hotspots. So we have our high incident areas where we know the targets, but where we didn't have necessarily high incident areas, maybe in Germantown or in other parts of the county, we have district hotspots where the district then focuses our efforts with on-duty officer time as well as the overtime that was provided for us. So we still continue our comprehensive effort. DOT, in which Chris is here, and Najee for the education campaign. They were the lead with the engineering aspects, and we're still growing in our major investments. But we, from enforcement, try to support it with education. But we're looking for future years, looking to build on the education campaign. And I think we need to evaluate the potential of bringing in outside help to really look to see, like we did when we started the speed camera program, bringing in people that will help us focus our message and look at really expanding our approach. Lorraine, the PIO office, does an excellent job with the time they can dedicate, but if this is going to be an effort where we need to focus effort, I think education is our biggest bang for the buck.
So I have a couple of questions. One is, you've got a map on Circle 20 that has 7 pedestrian fatalities, but the chart on Circle 19 says 11. So are there 4 missing off this map?
There were 4 taken off the map. What happened was the 7 is what got promoted in the by the news because they were more traditional crashes. The 4 other crashes we occurred was one which a lady got out of her vehicle when she was in a church parking lot and didn't put the car in park. We had one incident that resulted in an assault where the gentleman was left in the middle of the roadway. We had an event where it was a completely undetermined death, and we had one where a vehicle rear-ended another vehicle. The driver got out of the car and was struck by a drunk driver. So
Okay.
those do count, and, you know, it's people losing life. But as far as this discussion and the discussion on trying to promote awareness, we tried to narrow it down to your traditional people crossing the roadway were struck by vehicles.
Okay. Were we doing a public campaign, public information campaign prior to this? I mean, you said that, you know, as a result of this, we started doing, you started, you know, putting out these palm cards and having a public information campaign. Were we doing something before?
Yeah, we recently transitioned our parking lot safety campaign to a more Vision Zero message to address the range of ways people are getting killed and severely injured in the roadways. And we have been focusing that on the rules of the road. So that's been largely social media, but we also did the distracted driving effort in the spring to really put attention to that. That's another big cause of people getting hit, is drivers being distracted. So we have been continually doing this. We dug in deep on this because we had 4 fatalities in 2 weeks in a small area, and we thought this is a great opportunity to figure out how do we approach this issue, which is one of our big causes, and do a test in a narrow area, and really figure out what works, and in a way that hopefully is replicable, scalable, countywide.
If you look at question number 6 in the answers in the packet, you'll see a list of what was being, programs that were being put on by PIO office as well as Ms. Nadja Kirby from DOT.
Yeah, and just Neji Kirby with DOT. As you'll see in the packet, we do kind of year-round education with the schools, elementary through the high school. So in addition to kind of the countywide stuff that PIO does, we also do it through the schools and with the parents.
So, but are the fatalities students or adults?
They were adults, and that was the big concern. Is we were just getting ready to start our school year, and they hadn't involved the students, and the students were getting ready to go to school, but we figured we had to do something and started really raising the hue and cry before the kids got in school and the back-to-school efforts kicked in.
Well, I mean, it seems to me we need to figure out kind of more extensive outreach into the community of adults, because the school programs obviously aren't going to reach the adults. Does the Council of Governments campaign, does that extend into Montgomery County?
Yes, in both fall and spring, but that's 2 weeks, and we
Right.
need 52.
To add to that, for the Street Smart campaign, that is year-round. If you go to any bus outside of Rockville right now, you're going to see a Street Smart ad with either the tired face or the new campaign on it.
And if I had a map of pedestrian crashes, not just fatalities, how would that look compared to just a fatality map? Is it equal? Is it concentrated like this, or do you find it much more spread around?
Well, it's countywide, and
Yeah.
it would circulate probably in the CBDs and the high incident areas. That's where we drove our data to figure out what were the hot spots, essentially. So it's, we can produce that for you and get that to you, but it'll be predominantly in the high concentration of pedestrian on arterials.
I think that'd be
hotspots.
really helpful, since, any pedestrian crash, it's probably a small margin between, an injury and a death. So if we're having high crashes in areas, we ought to be, I think, attentively focused on where those accidents are. How much,
Dominant factor is speed.
I was going to ask you, so is
It's
speed the predominant?
And that's where it's the arterials, downtown CBDs, when they say Silver Spring, where you have
Right.
Georgia and Colesville.
So if I know these are mostly state highways, all state highways, pretty much. What happens, could we request kind of like a circle around the CBDs where the speed limit drops to 25? I'm thinking, from, for example, in Wheaton, from just above the new Wheaton Library to Players Mill Road, from just beyond the intersection of University and Veers Mill back to Georgia Avenue. In Silver Spring, could you go from Spring Street to the District Line, from Summit Hill to the other side of 29 as it leaves Silver Spring? I mean, why not just create zones where the speed limit drops to 25 in all these urban areas? I mean, in rush hour, you're not driving above 25 anyway. So that's 6 or 7 hours a day. I mean, the cars aren't really moving, and then if we're expecting these places to be activated in the evening, I don't see any harm from dropping the limits there, and it certainly then would justify narrowing roadways. I mean, you all made the point before about if I design for 45 and I tell people to drive 25, that's really hard. So dropping to 25 in these areas would then give us a perfect rationale for, narrowing and getting room for bike lanes and other things, or wider pedestrian sidewalks, or any of the innovative stuff people do to create pinch points where people visually try to slow down. So, I mean, I would like to have a serious discussion about dropping the speed limits in the urban cores.
Chris Conklin with DOT. I'd just like to mention that I did talk with Administrator Slater about these issues last week, And they're implementing a program in the repaving of Veers Mill Road to narrow the lanes and try to drive speeds down. And this rash of fatalities, plus the Vision Zero effort, does have their full attention, and they're engaged with us trying to address some of these issues. So I think that's a good suggestion, and we can raise it with SHA next time we meet.
I'd appreciate it because, I mean, Veers Mill, I mean, it's a shock point because of the fatalities, but we've heard from residents in all the urban areas where people are trying to simultaneously activate them and the speed limits aren't being adjusted down. I think this is a request broadly, and if my colleagues would agree, I think let's ask the state about dropping the speed limit to 25, and we could figure out the boundaries that make sense.
And for Councilmember Navarro, we've been working on Georgia Avenue and talking about from the entire stretch from Connecticut down. Because of this, we were able to have a meeting with SHA and really got their ear on looking at lowering the speed limit in Georgia and doing more in the interim in the area of Hathaway. Nothing moves fast, but we did get some good conversations. Thanks for your support over the years.
Tom?
If I can just follow up. Chris, you said SHA is fully engaged in the Vision Zero initiative. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Absolutely. We've been working with them in Wheaton specifically to do some median fencing or other non-traversable treatment near Reedy Drive and Price Street. We've been in conversation with them and have an agreement to rebuild Reedy Drive at Veers Mill to slow things down there and replace the signal. They've engaged with us in scanning of the high-incident network defined in the Vision Zero plan and identify those areas where either the trends there we're not certain that they represent an engineering solution, or it's something that needs more study, or there's an obvious quick fix that can be implemented. So we've done that for all 10 county corridors, and we did it in partnership with them for the 10 state corridors. They've gone back to try to assess those locations, and we'll be following up this fall to see whether there's projects to be implemented out of the 10 state locations.
Okay, so those 10 corridors, state corridors, presumably include both Georgia and Colesville, US 29.
They include Georgia Avenue, yes, and
Do you have any update to share on this? I'll just tell you my experience. So, and I don't think this is just a...
Colesville's actually not on that list. But,
And why not?
well, it's not one of the top 10. There are others that have a higher incidence of crashes and serious crashes than Colesville. Doesn't mean there's not issues there.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
not saying
we've had
that
pedestrian
it's a
fatalities
perfect
in the
corridor.
last 2 years on Colesville.
Correct.
Multiple ones. So, I mean, I don't mean to suggest this is just a Greg Slater problem. I used to talk to Neil Peterson about this, 8 or 10 years ago, and he looked at me like I was from Mars, that, we had any reason to make it easier for pedestrians to cross the street safely. But, I've had meetings with State Highway and the administrator and his staff right in the conference room here, have had numerous meetings in the district, have sent many, many letters from constituents, and cited many constituents asking for lowering the speed limit on Georgia and Colesville, as well as East-West Highway, adding crosswalks, adding many other features to enhance pedestrian safety. And generally, we've been told no in almost every case. And even in things that they are moving ahead on, like the shared use path with a bridge over Sligo Creek at Piney Branch. That project has changed contractors at least once, I think more than that. It was supposed to open last spring and then the summer. Now the summer's passed and it's still closed, and pedestrians are dashing across Piney Branch because there's no crosswalk at the stoplight. There's a crosswalk in the middle of the block and a bridge they can't use. So I don't know, what would be you sound very sanguine about the performance of State Highway on pedestrian safety, but
I mean, I
getting
can't
more and more
comment on their
frustrated about this.
implementation, but I just know that as we go through this initiative with them, they have been very engaged in looking at these issues. We have not got to the point where they've said we're implementing solutions on these, aside from those locations in Wheaton.
Right, it's one thing to be engaged and go to
Yeah.
meetings, it's another thing to take action. And I mean, I can give you 3 examples of places where there's been a study that's then led to another study, and it's led to a third study, even after they've said we'll put in overhead flashers on Colesville Road, for example, at Indian Spring, and then that led to subsequent studies, and their action that they had promised was taken off the table. But I'd love to talk to you more offline about what we can do
That would
to,
be fine. And, they have been responsive in other areas. They just converted the Matthew Henson Trail to full signal from Flasher. They have been active. They may not have addressed the issues that you've raised to them the way you'd like.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I can tell you that education really is something that's needed. I mean, we've all seen distracted drivers, and we've all seen distracted pedestrians. When I knew this meeting was coming up, I was driving home, and a young man goes flying past me across the road on a skateboard, and he had earphones in his ear. I mean, thank goodness there was not anything more exciting than that happened, but it certainly could have. He wasn't paying a bit of attention, and thank goodness every driver was fortunate enough to be back far enough that they didn't have a tragedy. But we see this all the time, and it's not whether it's in a parking lot or whether it's in the street. But I guess the first question is, from the education, I know you've just started. I mean, you've been doing education for a long time on this, but this program has just started. Have we actually seen more people using the crosswalks?
I would not say yes. I would say it's still early on. I think from my 10 years of being in charge of traffic, I've noticed that when we build facilities like Mr. Hucker was talking about, people will naturally use them, and then it's the education and the enforcement that gets the final 40% or 30% to get on board with the program. I don't think we've found that silver bullet. It's going to be a culture change to get people out of the habit of just crossing the road where they want to.
Right.
And I think that's going to take time, and I don't think we have the silver bullet. I think this is a good stopgap, and as Lorraine said, it's something that we wanted to focus on to see if we could then move out. But as I said earlier, I think we need outside help to come in to really combat it, because I have searched across the nation for the silver bullet, because I'm not ashamed to bring anything in if someone has a better idea, but
Right.
I haven't found it.
And I know, like in Ocean City, they have, and I guess here too we have some. They put fencing in the median of the road, and then in Ocean City, when we were recently there was somebody that actually crossed in the middle of the road and then walked up next to the fencing in the median to get to the crosswalk. So, I mean, I know that that's not always perfect either, but is that a consideration if it's that intense, that we have that much of a problem in an area, in a specific area, that we should consider some sort of fencing in the middle?
It is a consideration, and we have those fences in some locations in the county, and we're in conversation now on Georgia Avenue about expanding the fencing that's in the Wheaton area for this reason.
Okay.
And it is effective. I mean, people tend to maybe do what you said once and then realize that that's not an effective
Right.
way, so it does reduce the convenience of crossing the street mid-blocks that you find yourselves in the crosswalks. But then we have to find a way to make the crosswalks evenly spaced and protected as well, because along many of these corridors, the crosswalks are thousands of feet apart, and then we're in a solution where we're asking people to do unreasonable things. So we have to have a network that works for them to cross safely as well.
And you have to give the driver enough time to know that there's a crosswalk there. I mean, if you have it in the middle, and all of a sudden, I mean, you're trying to pay attention, but not. And there's some people that touch that button and think they can just walk right out in the middle of the street. That's another little issue. So, and then the last thing I have is we had talked about for Vision Zero hiring a coordinator to be doing that. Where are we in that process?
Right?
And Wade Holland, the county executive's office. We are about ready to do the RFP for the coordinator. It is in draft phase, up on the second floor, getting feedback right now. So that should be issued hopefully within October, and then have them, usually RFPs are open for 30 days, and then hopefully have them on before the holidays.
So we're not there yet, but we're getting closer, is what you're telling me.
We're getting closer, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for this briefing, and I really do appreciate all the work and the effort that's gone into addressing this issue. There is no doubt that this is not a new issue, but of course we are in the process of things, especially in District 4, of densifying, if you will, particular areas that already have been identified as high incidence, such as Wheaton and our revitalization project there. I think this is a very opportune time to start addressing some of the engineering issues, a much more active engagement with SHA, and I know Delegate Carr also has been involved in this. And I do want to say that, you know, I would personally really appreciate, especially when we have incidents such as the ones that we've had lately, which are in District 4, you know, a more robust communication with my office. And I say that because, as you know, out there, our constituents and our residents don't differentiate between protocol of communication. They literally start calling my office and they want to know what's happening. I also have the distinction of representing an area that is highly Spanish speaking, and so of course Spanish speaking media, et cetera, is going to call me to see what's occurring, and I wanted to understand what we could do to start pushing some things through. I did request our bilingual public information officer here in the council to use a portion of their Spanish-speaking radio show on Radio America to address this, and then I learned through the Latino Public Safety Advisory Group on social media that the county had also made some efforts. So I just really appreciate that. I think this is obviously a team effort. I think that we need to definitely look into maybe contracting some firms to look at the messaging that is culturally and linguistically appropriate, because it's great and we feel good to put out bilingual flyers and markings, but if it's not connecting culturally, et cetera, at the end of the day, we're not going to get the results that we want. So that would be one thing that I would love to look into specifically. And then very much appreciate the offer, I guess, of the suggestion for us to also engage very intensely with SHA on some of these other engineering projects. It probably will include, of course, looking at some budget items, and which I think is going to be, very important. But one of my questions, in terms of the high incidence areas, I know that, we do have that $180,000 that's divided evenly in all 6 district stations. So for enforcement, but of course, when I look at the high incidence areas, 6 out of the 15 are in District 4. So I wanted to understand whether there is room there to strategically invest more or spend more money. Is that flexible when we identify high incidence areas? Where are we with that? And then, of course, as we move forward with this short-term, mid-term, and long-term recommendations, will we be getting some updates on how that is going? How can we also help move forward, along these implementations?
Well, within the police department, we always find that we just divided the county 6 ways. So we look at each district commander has a lot of priorities, and what we didn't want to do is prioritize one district over another district. So that's why everything was allocated by equally across there. When I was coordinating the program before the last $80,000 came into it, we tried to balance it out, but we tried to hit all the HIAs equally. So we looked at the HIAs and we tried to make sure that we maintained each of the 11 when I was there. We've now grown to 15, but each of the 11 equally. So even though the money may not be allocated, we still try to cover all the HIAs because they're all important and we invested a lot of money in them, so we have to try to maintain them. What we haven't been doing is been able to educate in them. Mm-hmm. So where I can say we go out and do enforcement, I've never been an advocate of just going out and do enforcement for enforcement. I think enforcement is the final tool. Mm-hmm. What we haven't been able to do is sufficiently educate. We had great success with these street teams, which is basically the community educating the community. Obviously, when the police walk up, there's a potential for, communication issues. Even when we're trying to hand out warning violations or informational packets. So we found when we did the Piney Branch initiative that the community street teams handing out the information and having that dialogue seemed to be effective. But we were never successful in getting a lot of volunteers. What we hope to do is to reach out to the faith-based groups and get all the community activism going so that people would take this on as a priority and then go out to the 11 hotspots. And for your district, the big ones are Connecticut and Georgia. We have Veers Mill and Randolph, where we did put in a fence before Ocean City did it. And then downtown Wheaton. So we could go hit those areas. But we want people to take ownership, just like, they're willing to take ownership in cleaning up a road, in trying to work with the community, because I think that's when we're going to have the most success. But it's been really difficult getting it out there. We can go out and do enforcement, but we'll do one detail a month and we'll come back once a month. I think it's something we have to do, but I don't think it's the most effective way. I think if we have education campaign and then we come out afterwards, I think we'll get more mileage, more effect.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, I am not by any means suggesting that, that we only do enforcement. I understand this is a combination of efforts and strategies to get to where we want to go. Perhaps we need to also think through, in the past we've used I know the health promoters, for example, to address issues of public health, and I've always been a big proponent of having a team of promoters that can be educated on certain policy areas or challenges that we have that can go deep into the community, because we do know that certain communities may not have as active a network of community leaders and or organizations. So that's something I would like to explore with the committee, this notion that at times I think it would be great for us to have promoters that can go into the different neighborhoods. I know Impact Silver Spring has always been a partner in addressing a lot of different issues, so maybe we can look to them. And of course, specifically for the Latino community, as I said before, media plays a huge role. If we could do some, more targeted work there, I think that we might be able to see some results there. But I really do appreciate everybody, and I guess, so would it be this coordinator of Vision Zero that would be the person kind of like owning all of these different things, or how?
Yeah, I mean, as I'm kind of interim doing that job, it's the one thing that I haven't really been able to do is get all these community groups together and get them kind of excited about Vision Zero and helping us get this message out. So what we really would like that person to do as part of the year 2 of the plan is build these coalitions, work with these communities, contact them, be out on the streets, every day, working with these type of groups.
Okay, and then the timeline again for that was?
We're hoping, procurement is procurement, but hoping by the holidays.
Something we need to address.
Yeah.
Yeah. When did you say? I'm sorry.
Hopefully by the holidays.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Wade is the chief of our Vision Zero campaign.
I just wanted to raise 2 other questions or points. One is mid-block crossings, and particularly in places like Wheaton, other areas aren't immune. It's a long way sometimes between a stoplight and a regulated crosswalk, and we've had an allergy sometimes to putting in signalized or any kind of more solid crosswalks in between. And I do think there are places we really ought to consider that, because people are not going to walk 2 blocks to get to a signalized crosswalk. And it seems that I think these are things that can be timed with the lights on either end of them, so that the crosswalk in the middle gets lit up and acknowledged as a lighted signalized crosswalk when the lights on either side have gone red. They don't necessarily have to trigger at random, because I recognize that could wreak havoc on any kind of movement at all. But we could actually, I think, signalize some of these things and slow traffic down between the lights in some places to let people make crossings. There's the one in front of what used to be Barry's Magic Shop has always raised a lot of anxiety for me, because the road tees from the little shopping centers over there. It tees it on Georgia Avenue, and so there's no rationale, I guess, for a light there. But people try to cross there an awful lot, and there are a lot of attractants on the other side.
Speaking of magic, you must be psychic, because that's one of the conversations we had with at that location with the SHA there. SHA, and I don't want to put Chris in a bad place, but SHA is apprehensive about putting mid-block crossing, and I've been emphatic. you can't just put paint on the ground. You're going to have to put some kind of warning or signalization to go there. But I mean, we could do, the county has greater flexibility for Randolph Road and Shady Grove Highway, which are two of our major arterials. And when we've had a problem on the county and identified an engineering solution, DOT has been very forthright in getting it done as quick and fast. But when we're dealing with the states, and they're very apprehensive, but we have talked about that one intersection just the other day. And I've been emphatic about the called hawk signals, or rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Something that lets drivers know that I'm here. They're successful, they're used in other places. It's just been like turning a battleship in the bathtub, getting a state to accept them, but they're moving in the right direction, just at a snail's pace.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, I recognize that the state controls the road, but is there anything to stop us from putting a pole on the sidewalk next to a crosswalk like that flashed yellow so people knew it was there?
They control more than just the road, so yeah. They have the control of the right-of-way, and we have to go through an approval process.
So they would get mad if we put a sign that said,
Yeah, they have been more accommodating of these techniques, I would say, in the last year than perhaps in the past.
That we should all follow up with them. The other question I had was a follow-on to Nancy's point about culturally appropriate. I was in Medellin recently, and I will say that is an incredibly dangerous place for pedestrians. I saw no cars stop for any human being in a crosswalk at any point. And they were starting a very aggressive public relations campaign, but the posters and the signs that they put out were, I would say, less focused on, telling you a lesson and, informing you about safety, much more focused on like a kid wanting her, father to return home safely. It was much more geared toward a person reading it and having an emotional and impactful reaction to it, other than just another sign telling me what to do amidst a bunch of other signs telling me what to do. And I thought that that it was an interesting approach in talking to people who occasionally in the Lyft world who are driving people around. One person actually said that it was more impactful for them because it made them think. And they normally had kind of ignored that stuff, but reading it always made the person think about what they were doing. And I think things that make people conscious of what they're doing are helpful. Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up on that. I think that we really need to consider that we're looking for behavior change here. This is not a standard communications campaign.
Right.
The health promotion folks have done this with smoking cessation, weight loss, et cetera, exercise. And that's why I'm very happy that Captain Didona is recommending that we invite somebody to help us figure this out in a culturally appropriate way.
Nancy.
Yeah, just following up on that, I'm oftentimes reflecting on how, if you've traveled, of course, around the world, and I remember having a very interesting experience in New Delhi, where the lanes didn't seem to really matter, right? It was just kind of like whatever space you found, but didn't see very many accidents, which was extraordinary. I also, of course, I'm from Venezuela originally, and would spend my summers in Caracas. And it was just extraordinary watching my dad just kind of navigate everything. But I say that because, we are the Washington metropolitan region. I mean, we are home to so many people from so many countries. And so it is that combination, in my opinion, that always raises a challenge with public, education campaigns, because there are certain rules, or unwritten rules, I would say, that drivers in many different countries, right, have and implement in order to navigate the sort of traffic, I would say, cultural agenda. And then you are here with so many people from so many different countries. And so, I used to also think about that. I went to school in Missouri. I knew how to drive in the snow. I learned how to do all of that. Came to D.C., and all of a sudden a little bit of snow falls and everything just, freezes, lots of accidents or rain. And I think that there's also that piece that we have to take into consideration for these types of education campaigns, that we have people from all over the world and all different patterns of driving. And then you have pedestrians from all over the world as well, with a lot of different ways of addressing this. So I understand the challenge. It's not a cookie cutter type of thing. It's not just, you know, when we say the Latino community, let's remember it's Central and South America. I mean, so anyway, I just offer that because I oftentimes wonder, and nonetheless, I do believe that there are also some engineering treatments, such as the median fences. I think now considering hopefully slowing down some of those corridors. I know the Hawk signal, when we had those fatalities on Veers Mill Road, we all kind of came together. I was on Kojanandi with SHA talking about why we needed to, have it, and finally it was installed. I mean, I think that we can work together to recognize that, we need this sort of multi-dimensional approach to this issue.
And just on a comment on that one, talking about drivers, I think the big cultural change with drivers is that right-of-way is not an absolute. And that's the problem we have in America that they don't have in the other countries. Because you have right-of-way in another country, I've seen 6 cars work on 3 lanes and nobody hit each other. But we're Americans, we have right-of-way and we have blinders on, and at the last second, oh my gosh, someone's going to, so I think that's the major cultural change. And just remember, we're all trained by defensive driving, but I would say then that's expect the unexpected and, prevent. But I think now everybody is offensive or distracted driving. So that's the cultural change that we're working to change on drivers. So we have a lot of cultural change. But the thing about it is we're a blessed community. We have the ability, if we can get ahead of this, I think we can work together with the community support to change the behavior.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you. And our last item today is an update and a briefing from Rob Green and our folks from the correctional facilities about the issue of suicides in those facilities.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
If I didn't vote on the
Good morning. The item before you today is a briefing on the suicide prevention practices within DOCR. As the committee is aware, unfortunately, there were 2 suicides at MCCF over the summer. One was on July 4th and the other was on September 6th. They had 2 things in common. They were domestic violence-related murder charges, and they were also on or near the trial dates of the 2 inmates involved. Unfortunately, those are currently undergoing investigations right now, and executive staff's not going to be able to speak in detail to those 2 incidents. A full report will be issued to the committee once the results have been found in those. Today, Mr. Green and Ms. Alawalia and their staff are going to brief the committee on suicide prevention practices in the jails. A couple of major points I wanted to highlight for the committee just to be aware of going through that there are several critical components to this. Obviously, one of the most critical ones is sufficient and adequate and timely screening for mental health issues and suicide risk. The ongoing screening throughout the process of an inmate's stay at the jail in custody. There are also other incidences, other issues dealing with housing, adequate supervision for somebody who may be at risk of self-harm and suicide, staff training, and also the physical architecture of the cells and other places that the inmates inhabit, whether or not these items are suicide resistant. Nothing is going to be suicide proof, but do we have the most suicide resistant types of architecture in place? And at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Green to walk you through his packet.
Good morning. Thanks for having us. Before we start, I'd just like to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves, starting at my left. This is a collaborative process that we use to assure people's safety.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Athena Mara. I work for Health and Human Services. Good morning. I'm Dr. Raymond Kroll, the Chief of Behavioral Health and Crisis Services for the Department of Health and Human Services.
Good morning. I'm Anthony Sturgis. I'm the Health Services Administrator with the Department of Correction and Rehabilitation. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Aram Makhtari. I'm psychiatrist at MCCF.
Good morning. I'm Susie Malagary, Warden Detention Services Division, DOCR.
All right, and I'm Robert Green. I'm the Director of the Department of Correction and Rehabilitation. Thank you for taking the time to allow us to come and really give you as an overview of what we do across the Department of Corrections in the area of suicide prevention practices. We provided you with a fairly comprehensive packet. It's about 39 pages of information. We thought that was important, not just for the purpose of this presentation, but information that you will have that you can refer back to at a later time. So we'll kind of start from the beginning and go through what's happening with this area, this very complex area of work for the Department of Corrections, lead you through the slides, invite you to ask questions wherever you see areas that you'd like to discuss. The first place we want to start is really look at the suicide data in community jails and prisons. Suicide has increased as a acute issue that we have to deal with in a correctional environment, but I think it's very important you hear from our colleagues at HHS of what we're dealing with in the community as well.
This will help to put some of this in context in terms of when we get to talking specifically about the jail, but what I'd like to do is sort of give you a sense of overview of what's happening nationally around suicide, as well as what's happening locally in the state and in the county. Nationally, the sad news is that suicide rates have gone up by 25% since 2001. We've gone from a rate of 12.3 per 100,000 to 15.4 per 100,000 people. That works out to be about 45,000 people annually across the country. Putting that in a more human context, it's the equivalent of 2 fully loaded jumbo jets crashing once a week in this country. Certainly, if we did that, we'd recognize that this is a national crisis, and we'd do something more aggressively about it, perhaps. Maryland has seen a rise as well, but remains below the national average. We're running it's about a 9% increase in that same time frame, and we're running now at about 10.8 per 100,000 deaths in the state. And Montgomery County remains as an average below both state and national, but we've not been immune from this. From this trend. Our rates have gone up by a percentage point to just about 7.5 per 100,000. And that's up through 2015 for us. We don't have official data for the most recent 2 years, but in raw numbers, certainly we've seen that the suicide rate for the county has continued to rise. And tragically, within the last month, within the last 30 days, we've seen 4 individuals who've taken their lives. The numbers of suicides cut across age ranges, genders, racial and ethnic groups. We're seeing suicides in persons with no known mental health condition and no prior history of treatment in either the public or the private systems. In the county, men still take their lives at twice the rate of women, but rates among women are rising as well. Locally, as an indicator of the scope of the challenge, we track the number of admissions to the county's emergency departments for suicide attempts or ideation. And in 2017, there were over 3,200 emergency department admissions that were related to suicide. We also track in the local system, in the crisis center, referrals from the Montgomery County Public School System. Last year, we had over 1,800 referrals, and 60% of those were directly related to either suicide attempts or ideation. We spend a lot of time talking about opiate epidemic in the last couple of years. So just for comparison's sake, in that same time period that we had 3,200 emergency department admissions for suicide, we had just over 1,000 emergency department admissions for overdoses. So it gives you a sense of the scale of what's happening. It's important to note that opiates, of course, opiate overdose is far more lethal. And so we have a lot of folks who are trying to take their lives and not succeeding, fortunately for us. Contributing factors you see are on one of the slides that I think that's in your packet. Domestic violence plays into the role in the county, loss of a loved one, loss of job or economic stress, loss of or threat of loss of a home, drugs and substance abuse, of course, chronic medical conditions, and trauma, both historic, acute, and chronic. I think I'll stop here. Just that's sort of the national framework, and let Director Green talk about what's happening nationally in the correctional system and the jails, and we'll come back if there are any other questions a little later.
Very good, thank you. So that gives you a perspective of what's happening in the community. In the jails, just the national data, jail suicides are higher than in prisons. Jail suicides in 2013, 46 per 100,000 intakes. You'll notice that's 2013 data. The 2018 study will be released later this year in 5-year increments. In prisons, it's about 15 per 100,000, and in the general population, 13 suicides per 100,000. Suicide accounts for 35% of all jail deaths. Are by suicide, the remainder by natural causes, heart attacks, overdoses, and things of that nature, but it accounts for 35%. Next slide, please. This gives you a sense of where we invest our time in jail admissions. Suicide is an issue through our entire system, but the data and science tells us, and prevailing wisdom over the last 30 years, that the first 72 hours is the most crucial time. So in Montgomery County, to give you a sense of numbers, what it looks like from the central processing unit, which is a function we do for police at the point of intake, it's police bookings. We're looking at nearly 12,000 people last year came into our system. If you look at that first 72 hours, 26% of the jail suicides occur within the first 3 days or 72 hours. Taking that out to within the first week, it's a 41% of the suicides occur. So we are heavily loaded on the front end of our system, dealing with people that are under the influence of drugs and or alcohol coming in the door, serious mental health issues. This committee has heard me talk over the years, and my predecessor, Director Wallenstein, about the acuity of the mental health population and the acuity of this issue. We're guided in this area just not by best practices, but by standards, our Maryland Commission on Correctional Standards, ACA standards. We also look at that first 14 days as a critical time frame for us to have all of our work done, to include orientations as well as medical and physicals done. Next slide, please. This gives you a sense of DOCR suicide statistics. We took you back to calendar year 2009 to 18. So to give you a sense of total CPU bookings, in the central processing unit, we booked 125,786 people. In that period of time. CATS assessments, which are clinical assessment triage services you're going to hear about in just a moment. This is our collaboration with Health and Human Services, a central piece of what we do. They saw 20,679 referrals during that period of time, and suicides during that period of time. There were 5. The data was a bit unreliable going back further than that, and we would need to do a little bit more investigation to have that data for you, and we can have that in the future. We'll also get to a piece that will talk about this idea of expedited runs, so individuals that are seen in CPU and assessed to be immediately vulnerable, in need of mental health services, close observation, and perhaps suicide watch protocol. You'll see it was about 30% of the population last year came into CPU, needed those services, and were clinically assessed to need those services. We'll go to MCDC. This is our intake assessment and diagnostic facility. So when you look at kind of how things flow for us in DOCR, I think it's an important piece to understand. Police arrests, they come to CPU. That's that 12,000 number that you're looking at. Individuals directly from the street, corrections, with the assistance of our colleagues, Health and Human Services, we take over that function of arrest booking. Stabilization of that individual while they're waiting to see the commissioner, while they're awaiting commitment, potential commitment into MCDC, into the detention center proper. But in CPU, that is a function we do incident to arrest. And I would tell you in Montgomery County, I think we do that exceptionally well in safeguarding individuals and getting our police officers back out on the streets of our community very quickly. If you are committed beyond CPU, An individual is seen by a district court commissioner. The commissioner determines that that individual is going to go to jail. They're not going to be released on their own recognizance. They're not going to be released to our pretrial assessment program. They're going to be more than likely held without bond. It's either held without bond really right now, or you're seeing people released to the community, or the two far ends of the spectrum. You're going to be committed to MCDC. And if you're looking at a time frame, that's probably within the first 8 to 12 hours of incarceration, so that diagnostic period continues. And I think this is a good time to insert this piece before we go to the next slide. One of the most essential investments that this county has ever made in corrections in Montgomery County is the investment in pretrial supervision. And we've been doing it for 29 years, and when you can manage 71% of that pretrial population in the community versus in your incarcerated environment, that is a significant investment. The stressors that Dr. Crowell noted, you're returning a person to their family, you're returning to the services in the community, you're returning an individual to their own doctors, physicians, and the ability to, I think, quite frankly, incarceration being one less life stressor that an individual is going to deal with. In Montgomery County, about 71% of our total pretrial population we are managing very successfully in the community. I won't give you an overview of pretrial. You've had that, but that is such a significant investment for us. So if we could go back to the intake process suicide screening slide, please. There you go. So I'll ask Mr. Sturgis to help me with this, but this gives you a sense of how individuals flow and the number of times we ask these questions.
Could I ask a quick question there?
Certainly.
Of the suicides we've had, did any occur within the first 12 hours or first 72 hours?
In one of the ones in 2000, I think 2009, 9, 10, and 11 each had a suicide at MCDC, at the Intake Assessment and Diagnostic Facility. During that intake, the exact 71 was beyond the 72-hour period.
Okay.
So I refer you to slide number 9, the intake process for suicide screening. So the suicide screening that we conduct is completed at 3 unique separate times during the intake process, starting with the central processing unit. As Director Green described, a suicide screening, a questionnaire is asked by trained correctional officers at that time, and actually I'll go through this at any point in time. If there's a yes response to any of these questions, which I'll go over later, there's an immediate referral to our CATS colleagues. So starting with a central processing unit, if at which point the suicide screening is done, if there is no responses to a no response to all 7 questions, the person is immediately processed through, goes through the body scanning, and then enters into the jail, at which point that individual's in our R&D or receiving discharge. Again, that individual has a suicide screening conducted by a trained correctional officer. The same questions are asked. Again, if that individual responds to yes, there's an immediate referral to our CATS colleagues. If it's no, then we move to the next step. That next step is a initial medical screening. It's conducted by a registered nurse. Again, that suicide screening question is asked, in addition to other questions that are specific to not just medical, but mental health and substance abuse questions by that nurse. At any point, if there's a yes, again, it generates an immediate mental health referral, and if necessary, an immediately that person will be put on watch. So, for example, if the individual expresses that they feel suicidal or self-harm at that time, then we'll actually place them on a watch at that point. And we'll go through the different levels of supervision a little bit later.
I think it's important to note that it's very fluid, that a person may first be, could be intoxicated, and the recognition of asking the same questions. And when we talk about suicide screening, it's not just the questions you're getting answers to, it's the observations that the person has when they're evaluating that person. There's just so much that happens in that very fluid time. Again, with stabilization, change, commissioner may say, you're not getting released on bond. You have a very high bond and you can't make that bond. That screening then comes in again because the situation that the individual is facing changes. So next slide. We'll give you a sense of investments and things we've done as we've went along. So I think this committee is very knowledgeable of the central processing unit. And we started this in Montgomery County back in the 90s to help get our police officers back out on the street faster. If you recall, when we originally did this, it was in a vacated unit, one of our housing units at MCDC, and we were using 7 by 10 foot cells, 8 of them for central processing. It was a function that didn't have a space. We kind of fit it into the space we had. In 2010, as part of a stabilization of MCDC, we moved the central processing unit, established a different flow. We built in 2 male holding cells, large occupancy cells, 30 people, 1 female holding cell, 10 people, 5 isolation cells that were necessary for us to keep people separate, keep movements separate. If you can imagine the various you may have multiple individuals arrested for the same offense you need to keep separate. You may have gang members. You may have individuals you need to keep safe from the population, or suicidal individuals in that space. The staffing of that area, which was one of the council's questions, was how do you staff it? Lieutenants, sergeants, 5 to 7 correctional officers, depending on the day of the week, 2 commissioners all the time, 2 panel attorneys, and 1 state's attorney. So that was a fairly significant investment for us as a county, and a different type of CPU and flow. We added cameras into the cells in this area for the period of time that we are processing individuals through the system. The next piece is really looking at what do we ask on the suicide screening form. Tony, if you'd like to go over that.
So these are the specific questions that we ask, and as I already mentioned, we go through this process at 3 different stages: the CPU, the receiving and discharge, and the medical steps. There's a total of 7 questions. Each of these questions is asked along the way. If there are any yeses to any of these questions, or if there's any concern whatsoever, a mental health referral is generated at that time. If you look at question number 2, for example, if there is any yes responses to specifically, are you thinking about hurting yourself? For example, immediately that individual is placed on suicide watch and moving through the process. And again, we'll talk about the levels a little bit later. I should say, if you look at that bottom slide as well, the medical staff only, in addition to the suicide screening, there is a more detailed or a detailed intake process that occurs with the medical staff.
All right, next slide. This takes us to the mission of CATS, and I want to turn it over to Athena Morrow of HHS. Again, unique, I think, to DOCR is also our work with Health and Human Services, the flow and recognition that people start in our community, that flow through, and the ability to have HHS and this CATS team in our system has been critical since the very beginning, well over 20 years ago.
CATS was created in 2000 following the 3 suicides that you see in your chart earlier. And this was the initiative that was developed specifically to address that issue of the potential of early suicide upon admission. At this point, CATS has been in operation since that time. We're staffed by licensed mental health professionals. We have 5 on staff. I know it says 4 here, but it's 5. We are responsible for receiving all these referrals that come from the suicide screening, but not only from those. In addition to the screenings, we get referrals from any officer at any time who has concerns about an inmate, about pretrial, who assesses a person for potential release, or anyone else. We get calls from families, from attorneys, anybody else. Our mission is twofold. One is to assess, obviously, for the potential for self-harm, but two, to work with pretrial on diversion. And in order to do that, we complete a full assessment, the full psychosocial assessment for substance abuse, mental health issues, and any other needs the person may have. As we assess, we have to make recommendations to the Department of Corrections about how to classify a person. If a person is clear for general population, that means that at this moment we are not concerned that they're at risk of self-harm. If we have any concern whatsoever, then we facilitate an expedited transport to MCCF, where there is obviously mental health staff that can best address the needs of that person. Self-harm and risk of self-harm is a complicated assessment. It's not only dependent on what the person tells us, but it's a combination of factors that we look at. We look at how old is the person, whether they have been in jail before, the type of the crime they have committed, how shameful that crime may be to them, for example, whether they're under the influence when they come in and going through withdrawal, if they have a history of head trauma, which might be impacting their ability to regulate their impulse control or judgment at the time, history of mental health issues, history of substance abuse issues, and treatment in the community. We try to investigate who's involved with the person in the community as far as provision of services, what kind of treatment the person has received, how responding, how compliant they are to treatment, and how they're responding to different treatments. Those are all part of our assessment in determining whether we have the ability to safely house a person in general population or not. When we do make our referrals, depending on what we're recommending, we either refer the person, obviously Dr. Makhtari, our psychiatrist, and our mental health staff at MCCF, but if we're recommending a diversion to the community, we also make referrals to specific community providers and create those linkages so that a person can be transferred bed to bed, and in that process we involve the court. At the bond juncture, we work with pretrial and recommend a special placement, and we work out the details of the bond so that the person has the potential to be transferred directly. And to give you just an idea, about 46% of all the assessment that CATS provides result into a recommendation for diversion. So our emphasis is on trying to find the proper placement of a person in the community and divert. About 30% of our assessments result in an expedited transport. So we find that number to require that kind of special handling and observation to stay safe. Some of those may be because they require a period of adjustment or a period of detoxification or a period of observation just because we don't know enough. If we don't know enough about the person, we err on the side of caution and request a special handling. If a person refuses to answer our questions, we require the special handling. So we always err on their side of safety. So I think that's it.
I think it's important to note that, again, when you talk about various points of investment, diversion, deflection, CATS we're 20 years into that, but we're evolving because now we got mental health court, and that connection, the deflection to the mental health court, and that deflection to community providers, that if you have an individual that the courts say, well, release Johnny, we're going to release him to the community, that's not always the best plan, just to release and leave on their own. You have CATS and Health and Human Services where that connection already exists, and we're following that individual into the community. So the CPU process facilitates the connection back to the Health and Human Services system. Some of our clients are already engaged with HHS, and having HHS right at the table, you're not reinventing the wheel. You're going back to that system. So again, I think it's important that we point out those things that we do differently, but where we've evolved in this whole kind of moving envelope of those numbers that you've seen, which are incredible numbers. And when you're dealing with what the CDC describes as a crisis, we have been nimble, and I thank our HHS colleagues for being innovative and being there. Next slide. We'll give you a quick infomercial. This is a piece of equipment that this body has not seen yet. We talk about things that we've got to do along the way and as we evolve through processes of keeping people safe. Suicide is not only, can also be accomplished by overdose. And seeing that around the country, hearing about that around the country through our workshops, work sessions, our contact with National Institute of Corrections. 2 years ago, it became very abundantly clear to us that we need to invest in body scanners. So this is a body scanner. It was implemented, installed in July of this year, tested, and allows us to make sure that individuals that are entering our secure confinement have not concealed on their person and very directly within their person drugs, paraphernalia, and or weapons that could be coming into our system that cause us great danger. The risk of death by overdose is very real today, and it's not immune in our jail systems. We have to make sure that people are not bringing this material in. An example could be an individual that went to court and was had a predetermined sentence, a plea bargain. If they're perhaps addicted to opioids, I'm going to be doing 6 months, 3 months, making sure that that person has not secreted inside their body drugs to come into our system that could result in overdose, violence for themselves or others. So this is a new piece of equipment in the evolution of our movement through the system that helps us keep people safe.
Well, how often does that happen?
We are in the infancy of using this equipment. I can't give you direct data on it, but I can tell you everyone that is committed to secure custody beyond CPU has the opportunity to go through that machine. If they refuse to do so, we have an isolation protocol and signage that makes it very clear to them that if you have anything that you're trying to secret into our facility, it might be in your best interest now to give that material up so that you are not criminally charged with it. I can tell you if we do locate it, I will not hesitate to criminally charge an individual for attempting to introduce contraband into a system. So it's very new, council member, and we invite you over to see it, see the system, how it works, the safety features of it. But again, we are not on the bleeding edge of this. We're on the leading edge. Others have done so, and it was based on good research and science that tells us it was a necessary element and even where to insert it in our system so that we don't have individuals that are in the CPU process and have not yet been committed to the jail that are going through it. Next slide takes you to the intake process for individuals that if you're cleared and how you move to general population. Mr. Sturgis will give you a brief overview of that movement.
So in addition to the suicide screening that I described before, there are other points during the incarceration where questions are asked on mental health, and not just from the correctional officers and medical staff, but also inmate inmate services staff and others. So it was already described by Athena Moreau, the pretrial assessment process. During that time, there's also questions that are asked. Have you ever attempted suicide? When? How? Do you feel suicidal now? Other questions that are asked, and if there's any positive response to that, that individual can then again be referred to the CATS team. Also, the intake classification process, there are questions that are also asked regarding mental health history, medications, and at that time they receive a guidebook. So in that guidebook, not only does it provide an overview of what to expect during the incarceration, but also if the individual has a need or a desire to speak to a mental health or medical professional, the process is described in there. At that time, when after a short period of time the individual remains at MCDC, they'll be transferred to MCCF and be placed in a pre-placement pod. At that time, there's a more detailed orientation that takes place, again, explaining how to access medical and mental health services. We'll receive an inmate guidebook if that guidebook wasn't provided at MCDC, And within that first 14 days of incarceration, I think this is important to know also, the individual is assessed by a physician or a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant, and again asked about mental health history, substance abuse. A complete history and physical examination is done at that time. And then at that point, if the individual does eventually move to general population, there are other, again, that individual is, or facility is a 24-hour direct supervision facility. There are emergency buttons in each cell. If an individual wants to be seen by a medical or mental health provider, there again, it's explained in the orientation process as well as the guidebook to submit a sick call slip. If there's any individual appears to be distressed or is expressing any ideations because of the training the correctional officers receive, it's pick up the phone and call medical or mental health directly. So it's not just a matter of just submitting a slip, but we have direct communication with those individuals. All staff are trained on the signs and symptoms of mental illness, and we have health staff that are on site 24/7 to take care of our population. All cells are searched on a regular basis, and there's also irregular security checks that are done every 30 minutes.
We just wanted to provide that slide in response to Council's question about how do you continue to know what these services are as an individual housed in our system, and how do we follow up. The next slide, very, very briefly, just gives you a sense from a CAT's standpoint, the depth of the service. And this is going back to 15, but if you look at 11,660 intakes, 2,137 resulted in referrals to CAT, 663 immediate transport to MCCF. And as Mr. Sturgis noted, that's our direct supervision facility, our maintaining facility, where we have our medical, our larger amount of medical services and housing. But I will also note that all of those transports are conducted by our police agencies, sheriffs primarily, and Montgomery County Police, to get people up the road to MCCF in that facility. So now we're at the services at MCCF. You have went through our system. You have been now in the system for probably 96 hours or so, and if you have been found to be expedited, you're up at MCCF within probably 12 to 14 hours. If you're going to stay for any longer period of time, you've now been through the bond review process at MCDC in front of the courts, in front of a judge. And at this point, you've been transported up to MCCF for long-term housing. If not cleared, this is the process. I'm going to turn it over to Warden Maligari with some assistance from Dr. Matari.
Okay, so if you are committed to the detention center, as already mentioned, and further additional mental health screening is identified, it's a little bit different track than the one you saw on the prior screen where they were cleared for GP. I think it's important to note, though, that none of these tracks are totally isolated. People who are on a general population track who are identified as cleared could absolutely at any time veer over into the one needing the mental health screening, and vice versa. So we have individuals that come up and they have been identified as needing additional mental health screening. We work closely with those with our staff, and some of them are eventually cleared to GP. So there's crossovers throughout the entire system. So once you are committed to MCDC, then what happens is we have to continue the booking process. As Mr. Green noted, we make sure that we have everything done. We have to call the transport agencies. And so then what they'll do is they will take the individual and they will transport them up on what we call the expedited run to the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. That's for a further clinical assessment by our therapists. Dr. Makhtari, would you like to take it from there?
Good morning. What happens after...
You speak into the mic a little bit.
Is it better? Yes. Good morning. When a patient or inmate comes to CIU, Clinical Intervention Unit, then usually every morning we have a meeting. I have a meeting with the therapist involved in CIU. and we discuss all these cases. We have different categories of referrals by CATS to CIU, category 1, 2, and 3. This is categories based on acuteness of the symptoms. Category 1 and 2 almost immediately will be seen by me and a therapist. Category 3 is different. Those are people that they have low risk of mental health intervention or need. They're usually seen by therapists, and if they need to, then I'll see them. The whole process takes less than 24 hours, so this is not a long, drawn process. If some of the inmates need to stay in CIU, then they will stay there and we monitor them. Medication is given to them. If there are behavioral issues that needs emergency medication, we use injectable medications. Within 2 or 3 days, those people that they are affected by drugs, mostly they're clear and they'll be ready to move down to step-down unit or to general population. But we have people that they stay there for balance of their incarceration. They're acutely mentally ill. And that is the part that Mental Health Court and Ms. Morrow's organization helps us to move them through the process and move them out of the facility. I have to say, anytime that the person leaves the facility, we give them 2 weeks supply of medication. This is kind of automatic that people leave with medication. We don't just let them go. So that's the process we follow.
Next, we'll give you just an overview of, you heard Dr. Matari speak to CIU, the Crisis Intervention Unit, very quickly, the number of beds we have there, 44 male beds, 6 female beds, acutely mentally ill individuals, maybe withdrawing from drugs, under the closest amount of supervision and scrutiny we have in our system, and I believe our council members have been and seen that facility. Next slide, please. Again, in direct response to council question was, what is the process that along the way, if someone someone observes something, so the table you have in front of you reflects mental health referrals, assistance referrals. You'll note in August, 155 referrals, be it those referrals could come from medical staff, custody and security, inmate services. There could be a self-referral from one of the inmates in our custody, CATS, mental health court, whomever, 155 referrals. This is the mechanism, the follow-up, the what do you do to watch general population. We're giving you a pretty complex overview because this is not a simple process. But what is the process for the person that perhaps you didn't? Because remember, in our early statistics, 54% of the suicides the CDC found across 27 states in that June article were individuals that didn't exhibit signs and symptoms at that point. So the council asked very directly about that referral process. That's before you. So each one of these referrals is not cleared by a correctional officer, is not cleared by a counselor. These referrals are cleared by therapists, licensed clinical staff that go back, clear these referrals. Of these total number of referrals in the clinical staff, speaking to Dr. Matari, about 30% of them, about 30 a week come to him that they will need to be cleared and seen, and perhaps medication or whatever may take place, or an immediate housing change to safeguard the individual. But the council asked about that process. So just in the last year, 14 months, 2,018 referrals. That's continuous monitoring of the system and the ability to insert anywhere in this process you've just heard about an observation. When Johnny came down to intake reception in E-Wing, something wasn't right. There was an observation, a comment, something you overhear, even another inmate coming to a staff member and saying, I just heard this individual talk about this. Those are all examples of referrals. Next slide, please. And I think we're getting to the point where we're really answering some of the pointed questions by council. So the 15-minute watches, and suicide attempts and gestures. 15-minute watches, as you can see, by month. That's the number of people that we have on some type of suicide watch. 15-minute watch, a one-on-one, a two-on-one, which we will explain to you in a minute. 641 individuals since July 1st of 2017. That's under watch, so that are acting out or we need to safeguard. The number of suicidal gestures and attempts, they are the same thing. That is the clinical term, a gesture, attempt. Someone says they're going to do it, is actively doing something that is self-injurious. We consider that an attempt, and there were 15 of those attempts. If we looked back in our data, back approximately 10 years, we're well over 100 attempts. The other next unit that we also have is the Crisis Intervention Step-Down Unit. This is a best practice we put in place, an evolving practice in 2015. There was standards put in place by the American Correctional Association, very good literature and research that talked about taking a person from crisis intervention unit immediately to general population was not perhaps the best practice, to have a step-down unit. Our system put this step-down unit in place in 2015. It is a best practice, we believe, that's validated by research data and process. That's a 32-bed unit. These are double-celled 32-bed unit. Next, we'll just tell you a little bit about the level of supervision so you can get a sense. We've talked about 15-minute watch, so I'll skip slide 23. Council staff can read that. So if someone's actively suicidal, acting out at that point, Dr. Matari and the clinical team can order a one-on-one or a two-on-one. One-on-one, an officer must be within arm's length of the individual to immediately intervene and assist in that emergency. Two-on-one, we do that, again, in the same manner, immediately at risk. Cell door is open. So now we don't have someone secured in a cell. We have cell door open, 2 staff members ready to act to safeguard that person pending transfer to a state hospital. I'll give you just a bit of information along that lines. In 2016, we did 4,177 hours of one-on-one to two-on-one care. If this committee recalls, in 2016, I came before you and talked about the backup into the state mental hospitals that we were exhibiting in the jails. That was really some of the nexus for us to start looking at step-down units and do other things. But we had 27 people at one point on Dr. Matari's list of individuals, either by the courts or certified by him to be in a state mental hospital, not be in a jail. And those are the steps, the one-on-one, two-on-one we take to safeguard those individuals. I think that's important to note. Change in law that we were very happy to see this year with support from our council, our delegation. After 30 years of trying, we've changed state law that you can no longer indefinitely back up people into your local jails. Spearheaded by Delegate Dumais, Delegate Eric Barron, and again, our state delegation, and with assistance from people in this room, in this council, we changed that law. They now have 10 days. I would prefer it be no days. That when you're court ordered to be in a state mental hospital, but now it's 10 days to take custody of that individual as of October 1st. And I'm pleased to tell you, I think our backlog today is 3 individuals waiting that status. So those evolutionary steps that are all very important in moving people through this process. Special management units, you've heard these terms. Saw Warden Malagary just to go over the terminology so you understand what we're talking about in our system.
So administrative segregation is one of our special management units, and it identifies on your PowerPoint what the reasons are, but just for review, that unit is utilized for individuals who are unable to adjust to a general population setting. They are separated from others based on custody and security concerns. We have the safety of them, the safety of the other inmates, and everyone has to be considered. They may display aggressive, antisocial tendencies. They might be having serious adjustment difficulties. They can't be housed in general population or get along with other individuals who are in general population. Sometimes they are placed there based on gang intelligence that we have gained through our unit that works closely with the MCP gang unit. And there also are individuals that are placed there who have a really high number of keep separates. Sometimes we'll have multi-individuals involved in one incident, and sometimes they'll come in 7, 8, and they want them all keep separate. So in our facility, we do our very, very best to accommodate those requests, but you have to find those different areas and manage that accordingly. The other special management unit noted is the protective custody unit. The protective custody unit was established definitively to protect that individual who is there from harm by other inmates. Some of the reasons that they are housed there are similar to what ADSEG is, but again, it's to protect them from harm from other inmates. We have 2 officers on this in this posting so that there's an increased level of observation. Individuals are in there, again, for sometimes gang separations. Sometimes our law enforcement partners will ask us to keep individuals separate based on testimony that they hope to gain or are gaining. Sometimes an individual just presents as particularly vulnerable, and we feel like that individual needs to perhaps be housed in that area for a while. We look at high-profile cases. We also look at individuals who request it. We do have individuals who come in and they request protective custody for certain reasons. So we will do our best to honor those requests. It's important to note that everyone in the special management areas of the jail are reviewed weekly. We have a special classification review committee that meets. It has a mental health professional. It has custody and security, inmate services, and medical. And they all meet and they review all of the individuals in these housing areas because obviously the goal is to get to the least restrictive housing and to get them out into general population if we can.
So I think the explanation of protective custody was one that would particularly, I was asked directly from the council, was protective custody, protecting the individual from themselves, and it is, we've given you the definition and how we utilize it, is also protecting the individual from other individuals within the system. So I think I'm not going to go through all the staff training and education. I would tell you I think our correctional officers, the people tasked daily with being on those posts are well trained. They are trained at the orientation level into the department, the academy level, and continuous training through our system. There's not many a day that goes by that we're not talking about mental health management, acuity management. I think our staff could define that for you as well as I can. They're on top of their jobs. They know their jobs. And on this clinical side, I would tell you we are blessed to have it. So I will allow you to just kind of look through the training. There was one note about this CIT training. I think you are familiar with the CIT training that's taught by Scott Davis and Montgomery County Police. That is an add-on training for us. That's something we do above and beyond the normal correctional training, an opportunity for us and our staff, our licensed staff as well as our correctional staff. We try to about 5 slots every time they have that training that keeps us connected to what's happening in the community. That's really strongly focused on the mentally ill, what the signs and symptoms are, what individuals are going through, and it creates a strong connection to our police officers. But we view that as an above and beyond our normal correctional staff training. Slide 33, council staff had asked about, what's the staffing look like? What are we doing here? This gives you a breakdown. Mental health staff, I think you got a strong focus on, we have clinical staff in place. These are not paraprofessionals. These are not individuals that have just been trained to do this work. These are licensed clinical staff that are working in this area. Our medical staff, incredible. Our physicians assistants, but you'll see all of the individuals that are tasked in both facilities with providing that care. I'm just trying to get through some of the stuff a little quickly. You ask about some unique things that we do. If we could go to the page on the custody and security end of shift reports. Next one. One of the things we have in place is that about 15 times a day, 5 a shift, every 8 hours, there's constant communication across our system. Every shift, at the facility, MCDC, MCCF, our central processing unit, our kitchen, our pre-release center. They produce every 8 hours a significant incident summary and significant things that they're dealing with in their system that is published to the command staff and others. This is an excellent method of communication, but it shows every 8 hours we're looking at the status across the full focus of our system of what's happening. The last piece I'll leave you with is some of the best practices that we've put into play, which is our last slide. As I told you, pretrial assessment and supervision, people not being in jail to begin with, that is an incredible investment for us. The Health and Human Services collaboration and relationship doesn't exist, in my view, anywhere in this state, in this country, as good as we have it with our colleagues from Health and Human Services, integrated together, looking at populations coming in, going out, and not only just looking at our piece, looking at collectively the piece and how we can change people's lives and direct them to where they need to be. When they're leaving the jail, making sure they're getting the services that they need or deflecting them to begin with. And I want to thank Dr. Uma and her staff, Dr. Crow and Athena, for their work in that. Our utilization of clinical staff, you've got an understanding of that. Central processing, there are also deaths in custody related to incident and arrest, and I think Montgomery County does an incredible job there, where we're able to afford our police officers the opportunity to bring those individuals to CPU, where we have medical, we have trained staff. I've often said the ability for our police officers, catchers, and then trained keepers, our CPU staff, to be able to take over that piece has been an incredible investment for our county. Mental health court, which we are delighted to have. I cannot tell you the numbers that you would see increased in 18 if we did not have mental health court with the contacts. I would relish the opportunity to tell you, quite frankly, how well it is working, because we're not seeing those people multiple times, 10 times a year, 5 times a year, 8 times a year coming into our system. So our investments over the last 5 years, the body scanner, step-down unit, 2 additional staff in that. We're modifying doors. You ask about physical plant. We're modifying doors so we can see into cells, so we have better view of individuals. Those are constant kind of modifications that we evolve through, and the amount of one-on-one and two-on-one that we invest in is best practices. I think probably to sum this up, I'd like to go to Dr. Matari and just some closing comments about the individuals that we see and the acuity that we deal with.
We see people from all walks of life and all kinds of problems with mental illness, from schizophrenia to depression to different categories of mental illness. Fortunately, we have good staff that helps us to, and helps me, frankly, to go through the whole process. I guess the significance of this unit is basically we're operating on standards of the hospital. I work in Clifton T. Perkins Hospital, so I'm familiar with what are the expectations from people that they are actively suicidal or we need to observe them rapidly. Standards that we use in the OCR, MCCF, is exactly like what we do at Clifton T. Perkins Hospital. That includes, as Director mentioned, one-on-one observation, 2-to-1 observation, 15 minutes watch. We have chairs that basically restricts them from movement if they are very aggressive or assaultive. We have good medical unit and very responsive nursing staff that practically immediately they respond if there is any emergency medication is needed. I have full access to all kinds of medication that I need to handle the patients, thanks to our medical staff and Mr. Sturgis. So basically, we have a very good, well-running unit. We are not perfect, but we are striving toward that. So that's all I have to say.
We are available for your questions. So we gave you a lot of material, but again, complex issue.
So, look, I thank you for the material, and I think all of us recognize that we have a really excellent facility. You've got a long record of, awards and citations for the work you do. We have this problem, and what you haven't, what didn't get addressed is what do we learn from these two incidents, and what do you do differently? I mean, if you've got people on 15-minute watch, and you can do something, and you've got this 15-minute gap, what do you do so there's not a 15-minute gap? Can you put cameras in cells? I mean, I think this is why we're here today, is to talk about what happened, and this is a presentation of what we do, but it doesn't address okay, this happened, what do we do now?
Fair question. So we gave you, the title of the program for us was Suicide Prevention. What do we do and how we do it in the system? We felt it critical you see that. Both of those incidences are under investigation. So when you talk about an investigation, what is it? There's a police investigation. We await the medical examiner's report, toxicology reports. We do a quality assurance review. Mr. Sturgis and his team will do a mortality review. There will be a psychological autopsy. All of those are elements of the investigation. Both of those investigations remain in process. When you look at what we've done so far, I can tell you one thing that is important to note. Neither of these individuals were on suicide watch. When we have the completed investigation with all those pieces together, we will be in a position to address process, flow, but I think it was important for you to understand what we do. And for me to talk about the investigations prior to them being fully completed, I'd potentially be giving you inaccurate information. Now, that being said, what have we done so far? I took sheets out of the jail. Why did I take sheets out of the jail? We reviewed these processes. We removed sheets. I went back. I had a session at the National Institute of Corrections September 5th before this happened, and I listened to facilities talk about very transparent. We don't want this to happen. We want to address what occurred and what we can do. One of the elements that the National Institute of Corrections brought forward that a small number of jails have done is remove sheets, because what do? You remove the element or the item that was used to harm oneself. By no stretch of the imagination is that a solution to this issue. All right, it's one piece of it. That's what was used in these incidents. So what are we doing? We've convened twice now to look at. We've given an extra blanket. Blankets are heavier, less nimble to be twisted and perhaps tied, but they're not the final solution. We're looking at products and materials that we can use that provide some level of constitutional comfort to an individual. We simply can't put everyone in a system on suicide watch. It's not appropriate. And again, I think I'd leave Dr. Matari to maybe speak to that directly. But we want to do everything we can to safeguard individuals and safeguard them in their cells. Our cells are double bunked. So one of the questions asked was, what does that physical plant look like? Limited tie-off points, limited ability to utilize the item I just described to you. Our facility, MCCF, was built state-of-the-art. Designed by a team under the elements of direct supervision, a national architect to be a safe facility. But we are double bunked in some areas. We're going to look at all that. What are we doing moving forward? Looking at those pieces. We're trying to limit isolating people one-on-one in a cell. But you heard some of the complexities of protective custody, protecting people from other individuals. That's a reality for us when we're looking at validated gang members, increase in violence. So we're balancing both of those things in our system. So we're looking at that, and I am completely open to not thinking I have all of the answers or this team has all the answers. I think we do very good work. We're going to ask the National, and have asked, I've officially asked the National Institute of Corrections to do a review of our processes. Tell us what we can perhaps do better, where we can be more innovative, and how we can address this. I don't want anyone to die in my system, period. And I'm open to all of that. That's what we've done so far. And we are going to have a full review, as we did in, I think, 1997 after the 3 suicides prior to me arriving, that, quite frankly, resulted in some of the processes we have today working very well.
So when would we expect to, when do you think we'd have a full review where we'd be able to talk about, you know, a little more detail and lessons learned?
We're going to have the elements of the investigation. I can't predict when they'll be done, when the MCP turns over their elements to us. We finish our internal review, internal investigation, and have all those pieces done. But I think I've noted, you know, 2 elements was limiting isolation, limiting the material used to do it. But Dr. Matara, you said something to me about individuals that are committed to perhaps wanting to harm themselves. I think it was a very important comment.
I guess the comment that was mentioned, we are doing everything possible, at least as far as we know, to limit their access to self-harming materials or lack of supervision. However, I should mention, even in the best of practice, if somebody wants to harm himself, specifically suicide, there's absolutely no way to eliminate that. Suicide could be a rash decision that happens in 5 minutes. Most of suicides, according to statistics, is people that they don't talk about it. Because if they do talk about it, they stop it. In a sense, they are advertising it and asking for help. So this issue cannot be absolutely prevented. We are trying our best to limit it. And as far as the director mentioned, the process has started. Bed sheets, isolation. Isolation is one of the major issues of actually causing mental illness. So it is a fine line. It's sort of basically what we do that is both humane as well as protective them. I suggested in some cases isolation should be stopped, but otherwise we need to have it. There's no absolute perfect way of doing that. We need to be flexible and be individual toward the treatment of the patients.
I don't expect anybody to be mind readers. You can't know, and I don't imagine that everybody says, I'm going to commit suicide or I'm thinking about it. That doesn't happen in jail or out of jail.
Correct.
Otherwise, it would be a lot easier to deal with. How many unsuccessful suicide attempts have there been? And then is the sheet the normal way they're unsuccessful?
If you look at the data based on jails, it has primarily been by hanging, by sheet. We've had people jump downstairs. As you know, we're a 2-tiered facility. One of our media outlets did a review on suicide very recently, talked about a staff member hanging over a rail, keeping someone from jumping off a rail, albeit 10 feet. We're a 2-tiered facility. It's part of the physical plan. The primary method used in jails and prisons is by hanging.
But you've had attempted suicides, right?
Oh, we've had many attempted suicides. As I told you, we had those.
Right. So is the sheet the norm in your jail, or is that, have there been other? There's just a lot of different ways of doing it.
There's a lot of different ways. So if you look at some of the measures, speaking to colleagues on the 6th, one was having problems with razors. So we've addressed some issues around a security razor. It's just different in different areas of the country. For us, the suicide adjusters that we talked about is we had 15 in a 14-month period where we intervened. But if you extrapolate that back, and I want to confirm the data, I can tell council it's hundreds if you go back to when we started the process that Ms. Morrow talked about in 2000. And then you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
You don't know what you prevented by having a really good practice. And that's why we've got to look to the research and the data. And I am very open, and I'm quite frankly looking forward to having NIC and having another set of eyes. This department has never been hesitant in looking at best practices other places and realizing we may not have all of the answers, but we're open to look at everything that we are doing. And I think the critical piece for us, Councilmember Elrich, is to have all the aspects of that investigation and all of the significant pieces, and then be able to explain and evaluate what occurred, and if there were things that we should have and could have done differently, how and what those things are. And that's exactly what we're going to accomplish for County Executive Leggett moving forward in this council, so that we can continue to be where we're at. This, 5 per 125,000. We're below the national average, and we're below the average for jails. I want to be zero. I want to be net zero. That's what I'd like to be. Will I ever realize that? I don't know. But we can strive to always make sure that no one harms themselves, and that's what we're looking to do.
But we have the same goals as pedestrian safety, and we live in a world where you cannot control every single factor that contributes to this. I guess the last question is, the last two suicides, were both these people on 15-minute watches, and is that an automatic thing to do, or?
It's not automatic, so because of the nature of the charge, we have many people based on some fairly serious charges that are never on 15-minute watch. We have a behavioral-based system. We have a system that evaluates how people, what we see at that point. Our watches in the jail can go from everything from constant observation, one-on-one, two-on-one, down to 30-minute irregular intervals in the housing unit. But we're built around this concept of direct supervision, and our council members have seen that. That's unique. Less than, I think, probably 10, 20% of the jails in the country, where your direct supervision means the officer's present in the unit and you're able to engage all of your senses, sight. You're not looking into a cell the entire time, but you're engaging sound, you're engaging process, observation, and we know that that is a safer environment. But these individuals could be on a 20-minute irregular round, 30-minute irregular round, or a 15-minute observation, depending on the unit.
Okay. Sidney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. And I know this is certainly an important discussion. It's not a pleasant discussion, but it's one that we all need to have and need to continue to have. And you're dealing with the large numbers, and to the doctor's point, you're dealing in large numbers, but every one of those every one of those numbers is an individual, and we have to look at them as an individual, and each person brings with them a different set of circumstances. And I know you're doing a review, and I applaud that. But is there a formalized process to the review? How does that work?
Yes, the formalized process, as I outlined to you, is part of a formal policy that includes all of those steps. Some of those steps are dictated by, by appropriate investigatory protocol and state law. You have a police investigation. It has to be determined that it was a suicide. So you have that first element by police, and there's nothing to believe that in these cases that wasn't. But police investigation, internal affairs investigation, which is mandated by our policy, quality assurance review from a medical perspective, which is mandated by our standards that we follow. Mortality review, mandated process, psychological autopsy, and when you talk about that, all of the issues that occurred around the individual, that mindset at the time, and what do we know in that process, and then we're going to go the extra step. The extra step is we're willing to bring in and want to bring in an individual that looks at our whole process and says, let's try this, let's tweak this. You saw where we're heavily loaded on the first 72 hours, and we're doing really, I think, doing well. We strive for zero, doing well. Where do we perhaps add service? Where do we change a process? I don't even want to tell the council that I have a thought. I'm open to whatever someone brings to the table. but we continually evolve. And this is really, I think, what I learned from Dr. Crowell, my HHS colleagues every day, is it's evolving. If I were to tell you one thing I see differently today, sitting in my chair, the desperateness, the hopelessness of people, despair that they bring to us before they ever become part of our correctional system. And you know, that's a big change for me if you look at human behavior, and we want to be a part of the solutions for those folks. And I think as a county, we've done a really good job in trying to do that.
Just wanted to add to that. I think what Director Green is pointing out is that there's an increased level of despair that we're seeing in distress, and we see larger numbers of folks who are looking at harming themselves or injuring themselves from childhood all the way up through adulthood, including substance abuse. I count that as a self-injurious behavior that people engage in for a lot of different reasons. What Dr. Green has outlined in terms of, Director Green has outlined in terms
I wish.
of, make you honorary, Doctor.
It just removed one letter. I mean,
I think what he's outlined in terms of the process in the jail is part of a larger model we call sequential intercept that starts with police and law enforcement and our mental health providers in the community, our crisis center, mental health court, drug court, the reentry processes that we use that are all designed to identify folks early on and divert them out of the jail system. So a lot of the numbers that you see are tip of the iceberg of the folks that the police have seen and decided they need to go to the emergency department. We don't need to arrest them. Or they need to go to the crisis center. We don't need to arrest them. And we do diversion at the front door of CAT. So all the way along, at the front door of the jail, all the way along, we're trying to pull people out of the system. The folks that get in there are folks who really we need to put in the system for some reason, or there is just no place else for them to go in the behavioral health side. That piece of monitoring and tracking and assessing goes on throughout that whole system. The sad reality is what Dr. Montgomery said, is that no matter what we do, there are folks who, despite our best efforts to intervene, are intent on ending their lives. They can give little indication sometimes that they're planning a suicide, and sometimes they can be very skilled at hiding their intentions, especially and even from trained and skilled mental health professionals. And then, as Dr. Montgomery said, sometimes it can be an impulse in the moment where a person has been cleared, is doing fine, and then at some point something sets in, and they take an action. When that happens, what we're left with is what we're doing now, and that's trying to look at the system and look at what has happened and figure out if there's anything else that we could do differently or better to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
And I appreciate all of that. The industry itself is not, and we've had this discussion, Director, but the industry itself has not come out, or has it come out with materials that would be tear easier? Is there anything there?
We've looked at 4 products that came out, and nothing is foolproof. So you take a sheet away, you've got a uniform, you've got clothes, you've got socks, you've got underwear, you've got things that are just part of the very basic humane treatment of living your life, whether you're incarcerated or at home. You don't take those items away from every individual. You base it on clinical decision process evaluation of behavior. And your answer is yes, our industry has forever looked at that and looked at tearaway sheets. Do they last? Well, no, they tear up in the washer. Right. So the solution, again, as I indicated, is not a foolproof solution, is use blankets for now until we look at another material that can provide some level of comfort off of a vinyl mattress. We've come a long way in mattresses. Mattresses used to be full of cord stuffing. They're no longer anymore. They're a solid core that can't be destroyed with a vinyl cover on them. That's the evolution from when I started 30 years ago, because the cord stuffing could be used to harm oneself and start fires. So we've evolved through all of those issues, but the industry's continuing to look, and we evaluated 5 products. And that's going to be part of our follow-up on this of what is the next evolution of material for everybody, because if I'm, people that are on suicide watch, none of these suicides were actively on suicide watch. So you need products that are going to be in general population and everywhere. You got to be, if we're following the data that 54% of them in the community are not individuals with mental health issues, we've got to look at things system-wide, not just in specialized populations. You've got to look at everything. And that's really the focus that we're taking on this piece, is not just to look in specialty housing. We're looking everywhere. We're looking at the total process from beginning to end to include general population.
And the last thing I want to mention is, of course, this council, this county executive applauds the mental health court. We've been great supporters of it, and drug court, and every other way that we can assist. And candidly, I know that all of us applaud the fact that HHS and corrections works together and works together to make certain that the person that is in this situation to be taken out of society for whatever time frame to make society safer, that they're treated with respect but that they too can come out in a better situation than they went in with. So I do thank you.
Thank you. I thought all my questions had been answered, but apparently not. Let me add my thanks to all of you for being here and the very thoughtful and helpful presentation. And it's helpful to all of us, I know, and I know we all appreciate all the thoughtfulness you put into protecting our inmates and our staff. Rob, you said, I understand MCP has to finish their investigation, you have to finish yours. Can you give us any sense of the timeline?
We're often dependent on when you get the ME report back for toxicology. You want to make sure that, if any kind of substance played a role in this, you want to have all the pieces. And to do so absent all of those pieces is not a good process. I cannot tell you that. I know that we check in with each other on a weekly basis, a couple times a week. I'm hoping it will move quickly. When I say quickly, I'd like to be done in the next 30 days or so, but that does not stop us at all. Our internal review, our ideas, things that Dr. Matari may recommend that may be beyond the scope of what's necessary, we're going to do it. And then we can always draw back, but it's not slowing down changes in the system. Like I explained to you, sheets, we did it. We didn't pontificate over it. We looked at the research. Few were doing it, and they said it helped. I'm willing to institute that. So I would hope within the next 30 to 60 days to have everything done, and then we'll have to review those processes, look at what elements of information we have to make other decisions, and how perhaps we give a briefing on what we found while still respecting the HIPAA rights of individuals and the process. And we'll work all of that out.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you. I'm just interested now in the closing comment you both made about the increasing level of hopelessness and despair your inmates are facing even before they become inmates. When they enter your system. So, and the increasing number, Ray, you said of inmates that are attempting to harm themselves from the very beginning of the process and often going, into their adulthood and childhood. What do you see as the reason, and what can be done?
That's probably more time than we have in terms of the reasons.
Of course it is. But since you're here, I haven't heard you say that before.
I think we live in a society where the levels of stress are mounted, the exposure to things increases for folks, the level of trauma that we're seeing, both historic and acute and chronic trauma that we see in the community contributes to that. There are folks who have seen in the economic downturn where their lives that had heretofore been very stable are now turned upside down. So those are some of the
more
things.
than 20 years ago.
More than
10 years ago.
Well, I think with anytime you see a shift in the economics and a downturn in the economics and people's lives get turned upside down, you may see a spike in death or self-injury. We are seeing new drugs in the market in the community that create opportunities for folks to abuse them and at some level to try to escape some of the pain and anguish that they may be suffering from, that unfortunately spirals down into an addiction and potential death or overdose. And we're seeing folks use drugs, and opiates included, to take their lives as well. So that may be driving some of the numbers that we see. Just some of the things that I think are driving the numbers.
Just curious, do you see more cases of economic distress now than you did at the height of the recession, are more cases of drug-related cases, distress now than you did in the middle of the crack epidemic or other epidemics in the past?
I can't speak to what the number, a comparison of the numbers, but I think that every time you see something like this, you do see a spike. An economic downturn will drive a spike. Increases in assaults may drive a spike. Veterans coming home with trauma or traumatic brain injury may drive some of the numbers up for some of the population. Aging, as people age and develop medical conditions that are chronic and painful and difficult to treat, we will also see a spike there as well.
Rob, anything to add?
Well, I'll give you, council member, just this weekend, from Friday until Monday morning, we had 5 people on special watch, expedited run up to MCCF for observational housing, and 1 individual who blatantly told us, give me a moment and I will do it. And I just tried last week, and I'll try again if you leave me alone. And that was the direct quote, and that was on the end of shift report.
And
so, I mean, that's this weekend.
And you too think this is up from 5 years ago or 10
Yeah,
years ago?
the desperateness, yes, sir, I do. But what we're doing with I can't imagine if I did not have pretrial supervision, if I did not have bail reform. It's no secret to this council, I am a huge advocate of people not being incarcerated for the simple fact they don't have money to pay their bond. We have developed a system in Montgomery County that allows us to manage individuals in the community with very low rates of criminogenic reoffense, getting to courts. We're doing excellent work, but I also know counties that do not do that, and their population is huge with individuals that have monetary bond, a small bond, have no pretrial, have no type of program that helps keep them connected. So thank goodness that we have that piece. But the desperateness is not connected to what we do. I think in the jail, it's what they bring in. I'm fighting opioid addiction. I can't get it off my back. Treatment, it's just, I'm at the end of my rope. And the critical coping skills, who knows, along the line where we may have lost some of that. But I've seen it increase, and we got to be data-driven, not feeling-driven, data-driven. And we come before this council, and as we talk to our colleagues in health, we are absolutely driven by what's happening, but what can we do? And all those pieces that we've invested in, mental health court, deflection. If we didn't have STEER with our colleagues in MCP, what would we be dealing with coming in the door? I thank goodness every day that we have those pieces where we've invested in not coming to CPU, but deflection. And our state is investing in justice reinvestment, which we hope at some point will be a reinvestment into some of the programs and things our citizens need in the community that will help them to avoid incarceration. So I'm very thankful for those, because it could be a whole lot worse for us in terms of what we're dealing with if we didn't have those programs.
I know it's a much bigger question than we can answer today, but yes, sir. We appreciate all your thoughts now and your best ideas in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate everything you guys contributed today, and your comments about the economy are just so dead on, because we are technically not in a recession, but people didn't recover. And so if you lost your house, you lost your house, and if you are struggling to make ends meet, you got a job, but the job didn't pay what it used to pay. There are people out there who just are not where they were before, and that's, I think, taken an enormous toll. And you've talked about the ability to move people into proper facilities, but you are still the largest mental health institution in the county, so you've been able to take off the most difficult cases, but you're still handling a lot of difficult people, not who the state won't deem ready for a hospital, but certainly, frankly, don't belong in jails. They should be getting help and possibly wouldn't wind up in jail. I just, saw this morning that the shooter in Hartford County had mental illness, and this is just deep and persistent. So I look forward to the follow-up on this. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.